Welcome to the Hanukkah edition of the weekly webinar of Rabbi Pinchas Winston. This is brought to you by Bring Them Home organization that can be found on bringthemhome.org.al, israeltorah.org, as well as its timetolieve.com. It is also being co-sponsored by Israel 365 and Israel 365 News. Again, we welcome back Rabbi Pinchas Winston. His website is found at 36.org. That's where you can find his books and his shiurim. And we also highly recommend that you go to our YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/Israel Torah, for all of the webinars and all of the shiurim having to do with Aliyah La'aretz, coming back to the land in Gathering of the Exiles. And with that, I will let Rabbi Winston start his weekly webinar, which is entitled Rising to the Occasion.
Thanks. For all of those in our time zone who are now celebrating Hanukkah, Hanukkah Sameach, Happy Hanukkah, should be a light-filled Hanukkah. And for those who still have yet to enter that time zone, that time period, to light your menorah. So in advance, Happy Hanukkah to you, and that it should be an enlightening period of time for all of us, because that's what it's supposed to be. It says in the Torah that, the first verse is Bereshis brother Kima es Shemayim v'Haaretz. In the beginning, God made the heaven and made the earth. The Haaretz Haisa Tovavohu v'Choshech al Pnei Toham v'Ruach Elokim Merchepes al Pnei Mayim. That the earth was null and void, and there was darkness upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered above the water. That's what the verse says. And, if you don't know the Medrash, you just go on and say, when we make a cake, we make a mess. First, we start with, the batter. We do get the flour and the sugar and the milk and the eggs, whatever we're going to use inside the cake. And, there's a flour all over the place. And, it's quite a mess. Yeah, it's tohu. It's null and void, so to speak. It's part of making a cake. You build a house, the same in the construction. It's very hard to keep things clean. You try to manage it and make sure everything is masudar, very orderly, but and they do for a large part, but you just can't help it. You cut wood, a piece falls off. That's just the way it is. That's the way it works for mankind. Apparently, when God was baking his cake, so to speak, he also began with a mess. He began with something called Tovavohu, and Choshech and Pnei Toham on the face of the deep. And then he said, "V'yamar l'kimihi or, let there be light." There was light, and after that, he separated between the light, then the darkness, and day and night, and then came the sea, and the whole thing. 6 days of creation, Sheishis Yimei Ma'aseh Bereshis, and then comes history. Adam Harishon eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, making a mistake, being expelled from the Garden of Eden, and that begins our period of history, post Gan Eden, after the Garden of Eden, after paradise. And that's where we've been for almost 6,000 years now, at this point until today. And nothing unusual about that. Unfortunately, the Jewish people have had a rough time, a lot of it. In the beginning, it was nice. Actually, the very, very beginning wasn't so nice. Well, actually, it wasn't in the very beginning too. We first went down to Goshen in, not this week's Parsha, but not even next week's Parsha, but the Parsha after that, Parsha's Miketz. It was good for the first little while, as long as the Shvatim, as long as the brothers were still alive, the tribes were still alive, Yaakov Avinu's sons were still alive, so the Egyptians were nice to us. When the last one died, so that's when things began to fall apart. Then we suffered slavery for 116 years, and that's when it got rough, and then finally came the redemption. And the history's gone back and forth between exile and redemption, some good periods, and I'd say overall, not the best of time. But Kacha, that's history, that's Jewish history, and we're waiting for the final redemption. And when that finally happens, and all that will be behind us, Mashiach will come, the Yetzer Hara will be subdued, will be taken out of mankind, removed from the world altogether, no longer exist, and therefore no evil will exist. So even the bad guys, if they survive, will become good guys, and the good guys, better guys, and it'll be a better world altogether. That second verse is where it's all at. That second verse, according to the Medrash, is all of history until Mashiach comes. How's that? The earth was null and void, and there was darkness upon the face of the deep. So The Medrash elucidates that verse, and that doesn't make it up. It's a tradition that comes from Moshe at Mount Sinai, who got it from God. God told Moshe, this is what that verse actually means. This is what it alludes to. And the Medrash says the following thing. Tohu, which is now, usually referred to as now, that's Galus Bavel, because the first ones to come and attack the Jewish people were the Babylonians. Under Nebuchadnezzar, he came and he destroyed the first base of Mikdash, first temple, and exiled the Jewish people to Babylonia. That was the first one. They got conquered by the Medes, and that was a different type of exile, so therefore counts as a secondary exile. And therefore Vohu, Tohu, then comes Vohu, that's the null and the void, the Vohu is the void, that they both begin with V. And that's, the Medrash says, is Galus Medai. That's the median exile. And then the next one, it says Choshech, which is darkness. That is the Greek exile. Interesting enough, the world looks at them as the light unto the nations, but the Medrash looks at them as the darkness, at least for the Jewish people, because they darkened the eyes of the Jewish people because they went to war against Torah. The Greeks were Hellenists. The rest of the world likes Hellenism because it, we've been coming from a kind of archaic or backwards way of thinking, and all of a sudden some civilization comes along that improves things. That's a good thing. That makes life better. So Hellenism for many people was an enhancement. But we had Torah. We had the Word of God. And they didn't like what we had. So therefore they tried to stop it. And they met a lot of converts, a lot of Misyavnim. Misyavnim means Jews that became Hellenists in the end and decided to go to war against the Jews with the Greeks. And their war was against the Jewish people, and specifically against the oral law. That's what the tradition says. And they tried to stop us from learning. So therefore, that's called black. That's called darkness, as far as we're concerned. And then the last one is the deep. And why is it called the deep? Because it's a very long exile. The Babylonian exile lasted basically 52 years. They were conquered by the Persians. Cyrus, after 52 years, and that became the median exile, which lasted 18 years until the Purim story took place. And then that ended that period of time. And the next exile didn't happen for some time, 100 and some odd years. And that was the Greeks. Alexander first came. When they first came, it was friendly. He met Shimon Tzadik. There's a whole story to do with how they interacted and met. And it was pretty much, we were able to maintain our way of life. It was only as time went on. The actual Greek exile lasted 180 years altogether. And then came the Hashmonaim and the story of Chanukah. And that basically led to a victory. We had control over the land of the base of Mikdash for a period of time. And then eventually we lost that too to the Romans in 63 BCE. That's when Pompey came in and took over Jerusalem. There's already a civil war taking place between Hyrcanus and Aristobulus and the Hashmonaim family. Who's going to rule? And, everyone's it's a mess. It's a real mess. And the Romans came in and conquered and took over. And that's the last exile the Jewish people have to go through officially, according to the Medrash. There's now mentioned the Medrash of an Arab exile. They've added that on after. This kind of hints to it, but it's a different type of an exile. And the Roman exile was the one that lasted centuries and really, millennia in the end. And it's hard to say when it's actually over. It seems that it's over when Mashiach finally comes, but it seems also that maybe it ended with Kristallnacht and the Holocaust, and because European Jewry for the most part, but still people are living in America and England and all that, and Edom, Esav, has spread throughout the entire world. So it's still going on, even though the Arabs also became a very dominant force in Jewish life over the last 50, 60, 70 some odd years. And the verse continues and says, but the Spirit of God hovered above the water. And the commentators point out, or they explain, Spirit of God, Zu Ruach Mashiach. That's Mashiach. So in this verse, there's one verse of null and void. You have basically all the Jewish exiles, and I guess all of history between them as well. And you have the Messianic era. You have the allusion to Mashiach himself right there in that single verse. Now, what's interesting about there's many interesting things about this verse, but one particular point is that of all the 4 exiles the Jewish people were destined to go through, and this is what Abraham saw in his dream, or actually Yaakov saw in his dream, later on with the ladder, and the first one was outside the land. When you think of exile, you think of outside the land, right? You're taken, and removed forcibly from your land. And the Jewish people they were exiled to Babylonia, which is where they stayed until finally the story of Purim took place. But even then, they didn't come back en masse, just a large amount, but not everybody. And then the same thing also with the Roman exile. We were conquered by the Romans in Eretz Yisrael. They basically took us and they spread us throughout the diaspora. They just all over the place, took us as slaves mostly. And that's also an exile. We lost control of the land, and eventually we were out of the land. We didn't have much of a presence here for a long time. There were always Jews living in Israel, small amount at some point, but the nation as a whole was gone. The Greek exile is unique in as much as it took place in Eretz Yisrael. It didn't take place outside of Eretz Yisrael. It took place inside the country itself, teaching us that exile is about more than simply leaving your land. That's obviously one of the main forms of exile, that you're forced to leave a person's exiled from their home. They have to leave their house. That's usually the way we imagined it. But here, the Medrash is telling us, and history is telling us, that it's also called exile even if you stay in your land, but you can't control what you do. You can't carry out your activities. It's also a form of exile. And that's why many people today hold that even though we got back the land, which is a phenomenal miracle, you can't thank God enough for that one. And just every day we should be thanking God for that. And second of all the miracles since that just to stay in the land, to survive here, and then to build it up and to become so independent and self-sufficient and a wonderful place to live, Baruch Hashem, that nonetheless it's still possible to be exiled in your own land. And certainly having a government that does not live by Torah, does not make decisions based upon the Torah, is a form of exile, for sure. So the Greek exile was like that as well. And as a result of that, we didn't have to go anywhere. We could still suffer the exile, and therefore it's called the redemption, when the Jewish people finally took back control from the Greeks in a miraculous way, through the battle of the few overcoming the many, and the Torah learners overcoming the arrogant, and the pure overcoming the impure. It's all there in the Tefillah al Nisim, which we say the entire 8 days of Hanukkah. But it hasn't changed things. It's a very different type of exile if you're living in your own land. In some respects, it's better. In some respects, it's worse. Because, it's like to be in your own house, your own home, and have no control. And someone else has taken over your house, and you're just basically like a slave in your own home. In a sense, kind of hurts more than, let's say, going someplace else, which hurts a lot. But it's still not your home. You're still a stranger. On the other hand, you're also familiar, and there's always a sense of hope that maybe somehow we'll get rid of these guys, and if we do, we don't have to go anywhere. But what does it mean to be exiled from the land, and how did Hanukkah actually change that? Coupled with this question is a completely different question, but really has the same answer in the end, and it's really what we're coming to talk about today. In the temple, there was a menorah, right? It was a relatively large menorah, and they have some kind of a replica in the Cardo in the old city of Jerusalem. And but if you look at it, it was possible to reach up and light the candles. Now you have to also realize, we talk about the miracle of the oil and how it burned for 7 extra days. This is the kind of miracle that was going on with the menorah every single day during the first temple. It's true, we lost that miracle, and therefore getting it back by Hanukkah time was a great celebration, but we were familiar with this miracle. We see miracles to do with oil in the Chumash of Tanakh, and every day the Western candle burned beyond its fuel, which is why shuls today, synagogues, have what's called a Ner Tamid over the Arna Kodesh as a reminder to that light in the menorah. Now, there was a step, like, kind of a little, 3 steps up to the menorah, like a little, portable step, not a ladder, but steps. And they asked the question, why were the steps necessary? because you could easily reach, in light without having to stand on the steps. So it's on one hand, it is easy to go up higher, be on eye level with the menorah, even higher and light it. But it's a mechubadik thing. It honors the mitzvah. It gives it more kavod, more respect to do that type of a thing. But there's a different reason why. Also, a very important reason, and it's very much to do with Hanukkah. Now, before we get to that question and answer it, God willing, let's first look at something else, because there's another part. If you look in the Midbar, which is the fourth book of the Torah, Numbers in English, and the eighth parsha, so the eighth chapter from the beginning of the book, that's the eighth, chapter 8, right, is Bahalosecha, which is about lighting the menorah. What a coincidence. Even though the chapters were determined later on for the debates with the Christians, and we didn't have such chapters, but it's based upon some kind of logic. There are some differences here and there that it can be explained, that require explanation. But it is, we don't believe in coincidence. It's highly significant that one of the few places in the Torah talks about the menorah happens to be the 8th chapter, and Hanukkah, of course, is 8 days because 8 represents the supernatural. Not only that, but how many candles do we light throughout the 8 days of Hanukkah? 36 candles. And that number we spoke about is very important. Hence the name of my website, 36.org, comes from this idea, this concept, because the whole idea of the number 36 is this illumination of God's light in the world, which is what we are supposed to be doing. So it's a reminder to me also that this is the purpose of writing Torah and teaching, to bring that light down into the world and share it with others, that everybody can be elevated as well. Now, Bahalosecha means, when you will light, but it has the word to ascend in it, and Kabbalistically this is spoken about. What does it mean that should ascend? So some even learn a law out from this, that when you light your Shabbos candles, or you light the Ner Shel Chanukah, that you should not remove the flame from the candle until you know for sure it's independent. In other words, the wick is burning solidly, it's not going to go out. We learn from Bahalosecha this idea that when you light it, the menorah should make sure it's burning. It shouldn't go out. It's a kind of disgrace, bezoy in Hebrew. You light it, goes out, relight it again. No, make sure light it the first time properly, and when it's finally burning nicely, then you can move on to the next candle or finish all the candles. And this is the idea of Bahalosecha. But again, this idea of ascension, rising up, right? Having to rise up right there. Now, the reason why this is also significant is because they asked the question, right? They asked the question, why is it that the menorah is placed here? Well, why not? What's here? Well, if you look at the previous parsha, which is Parshas Naso, at the end of the parsha, they have what's called the Chanukah HaMizbeach, the inauguration of the altar and the Mishkan, the tabernacle, because they just finished building it. It's all ready to go. It's the first of Nisan. They built it. It's now a solid structure, and they're ready to begin the service of God inside there. And all the different tribes brought the same gift offering, each one, in honor of the inauguration. That's what it says. Now, the tribe of Levi, is not represented. It's been a long week, and got a little tired here. The tribe of Levi was not represented. Why not? Well, Aaron didn't know. He was from the tribe of Levi, so he thought that maybe God still has not forgiven me for the fact that I was involved in the golden calf, even though I did it for all the right reasons. I meant well, the whole thing. Nonetheless, it shouldn't have happened, apparently. And maybe he still holds a grudge against me. Not like a grudge we have, but God still holds it against me because it was the wrong thing to do. So maybe I am being left out. My tribe is being left out from this fantastic, incredible ceremony to inaugurate the Mishkan. And I'm depressed. I'm sad. I feel left out. So therefore, the menorah comes here, as Rashi explains, the key commentator on the Chumash, explains that this is here to tell you that this is what Aaron felt because his tribe was left out, and what he was thinking of the whole thing. And God comes back and says, by your life, by by your life. Don't feel that way. Don't think what you're thinking. You're wrong. I forgive you completely. It's all been dealt with. So why are you left out? Because I'm reserving something special for you. The menorah. You're going to like the menorah. They're bringing, sacrifices. It's a one-time thing. It's a one-time deal. They bring it now, at this time, one every single day for until it's all basically finished. 12 tribes, or 11 tribes, 11 sacrifices, and that's going to be over. But the menorah is an ongoing mitzvah that you have to light, and isn't that a greater thing? Isn't that a better thing? Isn't that consolation? So the Ramban, Nachmanides, says, not really. Because first of all, Aaron doesn't have to light the menorah himself. It's not a mitzvah that's specific to the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. So that can't be the consolation. So therefore, the Ramban brings a different medrash and says, you know what the consolation is? The consolation is that today you feel bad, but you should know there's going to come a time in history when the Jewish people are going to lose control of the temple and Eretz Israel. And when they do, right, the Greeks will come in. It doesn't say the Greeks, but the Beis Hamikdash will be defiled. But who's going to rise up? Your descendants, the Kohanim, Matisyahu, Yudah Maccabee, they're going to rise up. And they're going to go to war against the Greeks. And they're going to win. And they're going to rush to the Beis Hamikdash. And they're not going to find a menorah there. They're going to take metal and put it together and make a makeshift menorah for the time being because they're so zealous to get this mitzvah, going again, to rekindle the menorah. It's going to burn every single day. And they're going to find the oil and they're going to light it and they're going to rededicate the Beis Hamikdash in an incredibly heroic way. So what they're doing here is nice and it's good and I appreciate it and I love it. It's the right thing. No complaints. But don't feel left out because your descendants down the road are going to do something absolutely spectacular. So hang in there. I mean, you won't be there to see it, but hang in there. Maybe he does. Maybe he comes back later on as a reincarnation, but it doesn't say that, we can see it. That's what it says right there. So the 8th chapter from the beginning of the Midbar, which is the number of Hanukkah, and the 36th chapter from Bereshis, 36 candles, 36 chapters to get here, the Ramban says is an allusion to Hanukkah specifically. Right there by Halosachem. So why? Well, it's like, we heard the whole thing about Aaron feeling left out. There's many places you can talk about this. You can put it earlier, you can put it later. You can discuss it. There's lots of, it didn't have to be here specifically. It means something. Right here, Mahalosecha. After that, before this, at this time, the menorah walking up. So if you look in the prayer that we say at the time, Aneres Halalu, there's a special prayer that we actually say at the time that we're lighting the menorah. And we remind ourselves and we pronounce to ourselves and to the world that we're lighting this menorah because it's a way to to recall the fantastic nisim and the floyas, the miracles and the wonders that God did in the salvation and the war, and it doesn't mention the oil at all, quite frankly. Just mentions that we won the war. But somewhere in the midst of all of this, after we're praising God for all of it, it says these candles are kodeshim. These candles are holy. The candles of Hanukkah, they're holy. Therefore, you can only look at them. You can't use them. Now, the mitzvah of lighting the menorah, for the most part, at least for Ashkenazim, is that you light when the sun sets, right? The beginning of sunset, which can vary from city to city. But in Eretz Israel today it was about 4:40, 4:41, like that, and you light it that time, and it has to burn for at least a half an hour after 3 stars come out. So 3 stars come out in Eretz Israel usually around 18 minutes from the time that the sun sets. So we usually wait 20 minutes to daven Mariv, the evening prayer, and then another half an hour it has to burn at least, right, in order that people walk in the streets should be able to see, because we're proclaiming the miracle. We want people to understand and to see what God did for us. We want to, bring it out in public and pronounce it and make the world aware of this fantastic miracle as part of the praise of God. So after that time, at least in the times of the Talmud, half an hour after 3 stars came out, that's when the stores started to shut down, and people stopped walking around the marketplace, and they went home because in those days they didn't have artificial lighting, and it wasn't safe. So and then the mitzvah was over. So that's how it was established that we have a half an hour after 3 stars come out. In other places, it might be longer. It might be, but basically for half an hour. And even in Israel today, because we do have artificial lighting, that most of the halachic deciders of poskim say around 7:30. You can still fulfill the mitzvah. But the ideal mitzvah is a half an hour into the evening, and this is this is the mitzvah we have, the halacha, and the question is, what exactly are we doing when we light this menorah? So it says you have to look at it. It's only there to look at. You can't use it. You can't use it. Don't read a book by the menorah for that half an hour. Once the half an hour is over, even though the candle's still burning, you didn't put it out, nothing. It's just still burning. It's just a clock. Half an hour, you're finished. The mitzvah's over. Now you can use the light. But for that half an hour, or at least about 45 minutes altogether, you're performing the mitzvah. The only purpose of the Ner Chanukah, the light of the candles, is to look at them and to see them, because they're kodesh. And kodesh means that you can't use it. The truth is, doesn't always mean you can't use it, but Shabbos is kodesh too. We use Shabbos, but it means they're special and they're unique. According to the Maharal, he always defines kodesh as being nivdal. It's separate. It's distinct on a higher level. Not you can be distinct lower level. No, on a higher level. There's like the physical what we live in, and kodesh means it's distinct. It's separate from the rest of reality. Interesting thing is that we don't talk about Shabbos candles as being holy. Now, Shabbos is very holy. Shabbos Kodesh, very holy. But we don't talk about it as being, the candles that we light, we don't say they're Kodesh shape. The Ner Chanukah we do. So what's the difference? Or is it that Shabbos candles are holy, we don't talk about it, and it's more of a new idea to hear that the Chanukah candles are holy? What are we being told over here? So basically, it has to do with what's going on in the world, spiritually speaking, at that time. Every time Shabbos comes in, a person who keeps Shabbos the way it's supposed to be kept, halachically, and observes it all, right? They don't do any of the activities that we know are forbidden on Shabbos, passed down in the Talmud and the oral tradition, 39 creative activities and subsidiary things that we are attached to that. And you keep Shabbos according to the halacha, which is not so hard once you know what you're doing. At the beginning, it seems to be a little cumbersome, but it's pretty simple once you take the time to know what has to be done. You can always ask a question to someone who knows better. And it's a whole different reality. So Kabbalistically, then when Shabbos comes in, you may walk on the same earth you did before Shabbos came in. But the nice thing about the spiritual world is you can change your level without physically going anywhere. That's how spirituality works. I mean, even meditation works that way. A person meditates, it's a Kabbalistic thing to meditate. Because what you're meditating on, you do it, but you see, through the mind, through the brain, you can go nowhere and go everywhere and go far away, just in your brain. A person who's daydreaming does this. They can go around the world. Famous story of the Chafetz Chaim, after someone finished praying, the Chafetz Chaim walked up and said, Shalom Aleichem. He said, Rabbi, why are you saying Shalom Aleichem? He said, well, anyone who travels the world like you just did during your prayer, say Shalom Aleichem too. The brain can do that. The mind can do that. But especially if you intend to do it and use Kabbalah to do it. So on Shabbos, we get help. God opens up a level of reality by putting on nice clothing and praying special prayers and special activities and having a Shabbos meal, with the proper discussions, the proper singing. So that elevates a person into the realm of Shabbos. And the reason why you cannot do certain activities because it's inappropriate. It's not the place to do it. It's like being in shul, right? Synagogue. And someone says, hey, you know who won last night's football game? Come on, not now. I mean, I do know, and it does interest me, and I'd be happy to tell you the information, before shul, after shul, another, over coffee, but not when I'm in shul. In shul, I'm praying to God. This is a holy place. Why talk about football in a place or baseball, the stock market? It's not inappropriate. It feels like you're profaning the place by doing that. Just like the language we use. Some people they don't mind not talking so nicely in certain places, but in other places, watch what you say, how you say it. We're in a holy place right now. We recognize that. We understand that. So on Shabbos, you may not see it, but you certainly feel it. That's why Shabbos is considered to be 1/60th of the world to come. And you can experience that if you know how it takes work, but it's worth it. Really worth it. The person experiences it. So you don't have to say the Shabbos candles are holy, because the entire environment, you're doing Shabbos and you're lighting the Shabbos candles in a holy environment already in a higher spiritual level. Anything associated with a Shabbos by definition is holy. You have to say these Shabbos candles are holy. They're holy by virtue of the fact they're being lit for Shabbos itself. Even though the main reason we light Shabbos candles is that should be light in the house. But nonetheless, right, they're holy because of the fact that they're being lit for the sake of Shabbos, to honor Shabbos. Hanukkah, you can do whatever you want. I mean, you can go to work, you can cut, you can write, you can print, use your phone. It's considered to be a whole. It's not a holy time. Not that you're going to a higher level physically, and you're not going to a higher level spiritually. That's for sure. Not by the day itself. So that's why you have to say that the Neshul Chanukah are holy. But if they're holy, how does that work? If they're holy, and the day itself is not holy, then how does that work? Shabbos works beautifully. Shabbos is holy, and that makes the candles holy. Shul is holy, and that makes me holy. That's why I want to focus on what I'm supposed to focus there. But if Chanukah itself is not so holy per se, then how is it that the candles themselves can be so holy? Because Shabbos candles you specifically have to use to see what you're doing, to read, right, to eat the food. Just don't touch them, just don't move them, just don't add any oil to them. But that's the point, to get Hana. But the Chanukah candles. So it says in the Zohar, which of course is Kabbalah, it says in the Zohar that when the Jewish people light their menorah, which is a rabbinical mitzvah, the rabbis are the ones who sanctioned it. It came way later in history, the story of Chanukah after the close of Tanakh, the Torah, the books of prophets, the writings they were closed, they were canonized already. And then came Chanukah much later on, the Second Temple period of time. So the rabbis are the ones who instituted the holiday of Chanukah and the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. But the Zohar says that when we light our menorah, God lights his. He too does the mitzvah, even though the rabbis are the ones who, God didn't say do it. God said listen to the rabbis, so we have to do that. But why would God light his menorah? And what does his menorah look like? I mean, is it big, small? We talk about the sun, the star. What's his menorah? So Zohar explains, well, it's not a menorah like our menorah. Well, it is and it isn't. Depends how you look at your menorah. Like to me, my menorah for the longest time is this, eight branch thing and or base, whatever, and you light 8 candles, and that's the menorah. But the Shem and Zayas inside, or you use paraffin candles, but that's the menorah. So what's God's menorah? So it says that God, his menorah is that he opens up portals, doors, windows, whatever you want to call them, to levels of divine light that we cannot access the rest of the year, and maybe not in history until much later on. It belongs to a much later period of history, but he opens it up. The truth is, it's really a light that we'll see in the Messianic era as well. It's really the light of Mashiach for 8 days, but he opens it up because we light our menorah. God says, oh, you're lighting your menorah? Let me reciprocate by lighting mine. But what is mine? Mine is I'm going to send down divine light that's going to give you insight into life and understanding, and specifically what we call Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law that the Greeks came to fight against. That was the main war, right? And you will be able to access levels of understanding and holiness and spiritual development and tikkun, and like not even the whole year, not even Yom Kippur, not even Rosh Hashanah. In fact, many say that Chanukah is the end of the period of time that begins with Rosh Hashanah. Chanukah is the end of it. Now the judgment is finally being sealed and finished. because of how special Hanukkah actually is. But the point is that it began with us. We have to light our menorah first before God opens up His door, His window to these very, very high levels of light. We have to instigate, we have to arouse, we have to inspire God to do it, so to speak. And how do we do that? By lighting the menorah. Somehow by lighting the menorah and setting it up properly and doing it as the halacha, and we're very specific about how you're supposed to light it. It's not like just go light a menorah. There's a specific way of doing it. There's a discussion in the Talmud about whether you add one candle each day and go up in numbers, or when you start with all the candles, all 8, and each day subsequently you go 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, different understandings of as to what's really going on here, but it's all very, very, very detailed and specific, and our path, it's our gift, it's our elevation. Because in order for the light to come down to us, we have to first go up. We have to go. We have to rise to the occasion. That's what Hanukkah is supposed to do. There's supposed to be a change in us. According to the Pri Tzaddik, it's a tremendous time for tshuva like no other time of the year. What about Rosh Hashanah? Seriously, made tshuva, the 10 days of repentance. What about Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is like, the day you ask for atonement. That's if you're fasting. And Hanukkah? Well, if you look in Mount Tzur, we talk about Yemei Bina. And tshuva comes from the level of Bina, of understanding. There's an awareness that a person can achieve and get to on Hanukkah that, wow, that's what life is about? What was I doing until now? It's like a person becomes Chodesh B'tshuva. You just see the example. A person, when they first start to look at the idea of maybe coming to classes and maybe experience their Shabbos, and you say, would you like to keep Shabbos too? No, I could never keep Shabbos. It's so restraining and constraining. And I'm on Saturday, I go and do this and I do that, and I can't possibly imagine not going to the beach on the weekend like that. On Sundays it's already too crowded. I don't mind coming for a Shabbat meal maybe, but actually keeping Shabbos, the person learns some more and they experience more Shabbos, and somehow mystically and miraculously they change until finally they start to keep Shabbos. And once they start keeping Shabbos and experiencing Shabbos, they look back and say, how could I have thought I was even living until I kept Shabbos? Because it's understanding, because it's awareness. We think we understand life. We think we know enough. As long as we're not being confused, as we're not like, in some difficult situation where things are happening that we can't understand. During the time of the Holocaust, Rahman Islam, there was a time that people just, their brains could not process what was happening. The amount of hatred, the brutality, the cruelty, and what they're being forced to do. 1 week they're sitting there making Shabbat, or just 2 weeks ago in a proper way, and now they're being stuffed in cattle cars. It doesn't make sense. The brain, this does not compute. And then we realize we don't understand enough. And we look for answers. And if we can't find them, we become despondent. But when our lives, for the most part, are going well, and Baruch Hashem, you have to admit that the last 60, 70 years have been like a dream compared to previous generations, not just for the Jewish people, but even for the Gentile world too. We had a very good time. Things may be a little bit different today, and not like they once were. We don't know where things are going after this. But it was a very pleasant time, and people just figured they knew enough to get through life. And then all of a sudden one day, something happens. Someone finds out they have 6 months to live, or they lose a relative that's close to them, or and all of a sudden they're shocked, and they start thinking, start to contemplate, and their mindset just changes. And they start to read something. How many people have changed their diet? They're eating junk food, and all of a sudden began to eat healthy because they read something, and they saw something, or they experienced something, and it just changed. Switch went click, and that's it. Healthy food from this point onward. No more junk, because a little piece of knowledge, and that's just talking about physical things. Smoking, not smoking. Drinking, not drinking, speaking lashon hara, not speaking. The knowledge changes everything. It's like if someone would, for example, speak lashon hara, and someone speak derogatorily about someone, think it's a bad thing, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Bible said, God said, yeah, watch this, tears the world open. You look down, you see Gehenna and fire is burning, if such a thing exists, and it's like, and this is what you get for speaking Lashon Hara. Believe me, that person will never speak Lashon Hara again. They may never go into public again, just to make sure they don't speak Lashon Hara, because the image, the fear, the knowledge, this world is so much more than we know about it. I mean, this was made by God. He's infinite, with infinite power and infinite imagination and infinite mind and infinite will. It's like it's all infinite. And we approach it like it's the most finite thing in the world because it seems so finite, but it's not. That's what the Chashmonaim found out. They were dealing with the Greeks on the level of the Greeks. On that level, it was difficult. It was a struggle. They were losing the battle. They had to do their mitzvahs and Torah in a secretive way if they could do it at all. And they were losing Jews to the other side every single day. Assimilation was terrible. And they just didn't get it, what to do. It was always in their hands. But that's the world they saw, this finite, difficult world. So what did God do? He created a scenario that pushed them to limits. They saw something, they experienced something, and it forced them to respond in a way that maybe if they thought about it a little bit more, they might not have done it. Good thing they didn't think about that much more. But it was in them. He was a zealot. Matisyahu was a zealot for God. So this incident brought out the zealousness, and he responded. And all of a sudden, wow, look at this. We're able to do this, and we're able to do that. Like, what's going on over here? This is not the way the world works naturally. You're right. On the lowest levels, nature is different. But that's not what happened. Like the menorah, like the light Balosecha, the incident of Hanukkah caused them to rise to a higher spiritual level. The higher you go up, the less physical the world becomes. The less confining the world becomes. It starts to become, more, what's the word? Rubbery. So spiritually, like, you can do more. Gemish is in Hebrew, but it's like, you can do more. Just, accomplish a lot more. Sorry?
Elastic.
Thank you. Okay. Although elastic kind of implies it is going to respond, bounce back to. But you get the idea. Elastic is better than what I was doing. But the point is, the reason why the many fell into the hands of the few is because rather than fight the Greeks on their own turf, down below in that very physical world that has rules called nature, which don't really exist, but that's what they seem to operate as if they do, they would have lost the war. They would have lost the battle. They wouldn't have won. The miracle that we call a miracle seems to be a miracle because on our level, those things don't happen. So that's called supernatural. But if you could see what really happened instead, they rose to a higher spiritual level where the spiritual world controls everything. And those who don't understand how it works, they become the few. And the level that the Jews fought the Greeks, they were the many, and the Greeks were the few. And I'll tell you a story. I've told the story before. I don't know who's heard it before, but it sums it up. There's two stories, really. It's almost 8:15, but see if we can get them in. One story has to do with Gehazi and Elisha. Elisha was a prophet. Gehazi was his right-hand man. And they were surrounded by an enemy army. And the enemy army wanted to take the two of them and kill them. And Gehazi saw this, and he complained to his master and said, Rabbi, we're in trouble. We're surrounded by an enemy army, and they outnumber us like 10 billion to 1. What are we going to do? So Elisha says, nothing to worry about. We have more than they do. Are you kidding? You saying double or something? Like, what do you mean more? So at that point in time, Elisha prays to God, and he says, Hashem, please open the eyes of this young boy. He can see what I can see. And Hashem complied. He opened his eyes, and Gehazi looks up, and he sees the hills are filled with angels, military angels, and they're prepared to pound on the enemy army. And he realizes, yeah, we do outnumber them. They can't see it, and I couldn't see it, but he could see it. Now I can see it, and now I understand there's a lot more to reality than what appears to the physical eye. And the same thing. And then there's a story of Chinad ben Dosa and his daughter, who happened to light vinegar by accident instead of Shemin Zayis. How did it happen? That's a different story. But she did. And now the vinegar is burning and she's worried. Maybe this is going to come off my world to come account because the miracle is being done for me that I may not deserve. It's an issue. So she comes to her father and she says, Abba, what's going to be? The vinegar is burning, that's not oil. Am I in trouble? And he says, no, it depends on you. So what do you mean it depends on me? Well, it's like this. You know why oil burns? Yeah, because it's combustible. No, that's just the way it appears. It just appears combustible because every time you light it, it burns. But the reason why it burns is because God said, burn, burn, burn. Every time someone strikes a match, God says, ignite. And when they put it to the wick and it starts to burn, light. And if the oil starts to burn, the fuel, burn. Every single time, every single second, God's willing that to burn. There's no natural reality called combustible materials. That's what we call it, because that's the way we relate to the world, scientifically. So there's no difference in the end between vinegar and oil if you understand it's all one big miracle. Just that some are more common and some are more consistent than others. So if you are holding on the level that everything's a miracle, it's all God, it's all supernatural, then no, the fact that the vinegar is burning is no big deal. Because for you, it's the same thing. Because that's the way I look at it, on my level. But if you believe in the world of nature, if you're going to look at the world from that vantage point, then this is called a miracle. And maybe, yes, maybe it comes off your cheshbon, your counting in the world to come. This is what I would call the Hanukkah challenge, right? They're kodesh, meaning that the candles, they may physically be down here, but spiritually they're way up there, like on the level of Shabbos. But on Shabbos, you prepare yourself, and the day itself gives you the opportunity. It's like a staircase to a higher level of reality. Just walk it. Go into Shabbos the way you should, and you're there. But in Hanukkah, it's different. Hanukkah, you have to build that ladder. You have to climb. You have to want to be on the level of those candles. Anyone can physically light them, but then they're just candles. But he wanted to be near Hanukkah candles that access high levels of light understanding that will change your perspective and enhance your life so many times over. You have to ascend first. Balosacha. And that's why the stairs were there to the menorah, to say that even though you can reach the menorah, anyone can do that, but the person who's able to go up to the level of the menorah, that's a person who's worked on themselves spiritually. It's the first night. They go by very fast. Always amazed, wow, it's the third night. Wow, it's the fifth night. Wow, it's the eighth night already. It's like, this goes by very fast, but it's a phenomenal holiday and opportunity. Take advantage of it. Really important. It's just the beginning of the discussion. There's lots and lots of books written on now we have online, all kinds of discussions, the series of, classes on Hanukkah. It's all there, but make a point. Make that change. Ascend. So that when you send your light up, God will be happy to send his light back down to you. And that will change you completely. So, Chanukah Sameach, Shabbat Shalom, and we should all merit to be enlightened with the Or HaGenuz, the hidden light of creation.
Thank you. And just a reminder, you do have a number of books, correct, on Hanukkah on your website? So you can go to 36.org in order to purchase those books. I think they also come in digital form. Is that correct?
Yes, and the softcover forms are available through Amazon. Amazon carries pretty much all my recent books, including the Hanukkah books in softcover and Kindle format. My site basically has PDF versions of the books.
Okay. Just a few things. First of all, Cookie suggests that the word that we were searching for is flexible. When we were talking about rubbery and elastic. And there is another question here. I'm not sure if you're prepared to answer this, but John is asking whether is there any connection that you can see between Hanukkah and Chagai, and if so, which is the connection? Do you want to address that, or you want to save it for another time?
If he wants to know more specifically what he means by that, why specifically Haggai is he asking the question about?
I don't know. He continues and writes, referring to the last part of Haggai 1 and out. I'm not sure exactly what the question is.
That's what it says, that there's one path and Tzaddikim walk it, and the evil people stumble over it. Are you referring to that section over there?
Not sure. Not sure.
I'd have to look at this. I'd have to look at inside. Maybe what I'll do is I'll try to look at this week, and guidedly next week I'll hopefully come back with an answer.
Great. Okay. Looking forward to next week. Another great webinar on Hanukkah. We'll be about 7 candles ahead of where we are right now. And thank you. Have Shabbat Shalom and happy Hanukkah to everyone.